All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual event space. So my name is Allie, and I'm your host for this evening. And I am so excited to be introducing JoAnn Ross and Jill Shalvis here to discuss JoAnn's newest book, The Inheritance. So before we get into the good stuff, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. As much as we miss having you all in the bookstore, it has been such a delight to expand this online program to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in and for buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So I will be linking directly to books in the chat all evening, so it'll be super easy to go find them. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in. All three of our locations are open, or you can place an order online and come pick them up in store. Or if you're not local, we do happily ship. And once again, we're so grateful for your support. While you're over on our website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up in the next few months. And if you'd like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's in a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, you can follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. Speaking of social media, if you'd like to check out some of our past virtual events, you can find most of them on our YouTube channel, including this event within the next 48 hours. So if you'd like to see our other virtual events or share this one, go ahead and track us down over there. So we are here for about an hour, and towards the end, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other. We would love to know where you are from or your favorite latest read. But when it comes time for questions, please do make sure that those end up in the Q&A so that we can most easily find them. So before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone of our commitment to ensuring the safety and well-being of event attendees and guest authors. So in our chat and question spaces, please do lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. There are auto-generated closed captions available from the menu at the top or bottom of your screen. Select the live transcript button to enable or disable them. And finally, should any technical issues arise, which can happen, this is Zoom, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. All right, and I believe that that is all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce New York Times and USA Today bestselling author JoAnn Ross, who is the author of over 100 novels, published in 27 countries, including the Honeymoon Harbor series, the Shelter Bay series. Her most recent book, The Inheritance, marks her women's fiction debut and follows three half-sisters who meet for the first time and discover the ways that their grandmother's life in France during World War II can help them navigate their own struggles. In conversation this evening, I'm so pleased to welcome Jill Shalvis, award-winning New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of the Wildstone series, the Heartbreaker Bay series, and most recently, Love for Beginners, about a young woman who wakes up from a coma and has to rebuild her entire life from scratch. So thank you both so very much for being here. I am so excited to listen in on this conversation. If you need anything, give me a shout. My name is Allie. I will be listening. Same, of course, goes for you in the audience. I will be in chat. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage to our authors. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Allie. It's really nice to be here. Hi, Jill.
Well, nice to see you. The last time I saw you was in an elevator. I don't even remember what city.
In Denver. It was in Denver.
Oh my God, yeah. That was a long time ago. That was years
ago.
It
was a long time ago.
Great.
A lot has happened since then.
And I want to say congratulations for your book.
Thank you. Thank you for showing it. I love that cover. I was so excited. You know how normally they will show me covers. They'll give me like 3 or 4 and they'll say, what do you like about this one? What do you like about this one? What do you like about this one? And then you kind of get to pick. I don't know how it works with you, but then you kind of get to say, I like that lighthouse. I like that cliff, you know, stuff like that. And then I put, no, out here in the Pacific Northwest, we do not put white picket fences on our docks, please. You know, with things like that. But they didn't tell me about this one. And I was so nervous and afraid because it kept getting closer and closer. And I went, they're not telling me. And so I was wondering what they were doing. And when I saw it, I literally screamed. I was so happy.
So different. And it just kind of pops. Well, I mean, and I can never resist a sister story, but well
it
done.
reminds me of when my mother told me in World War II, they would take eyebrow pencils and they would draw lines down the back of their stockings because all the silk was being requisitioned by the military for parachutes. So when I saw that, because so much, part of the book is in World War II, I went, bingo, just nailed it.
Yeah, really great. Love it. And also thanks to Third Place Books for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Wanted to let everybody know that signed books are available on the site. I think both The Inheritance and I think My Love for Beginners.
Yes, you all need to read Love for Beginners if you haven't. It's a wonderful book. And what, Sunrise Cove, is that it?
This is actually the last one.
That's the last of the Wildstone, but Sunrise Cove is coming up right in January and June of next year. I know. I keep track. I read every book you have, so I keep track.
I can't keep track of my own titles. Can you?
Oh, I have to Google when people write to me sometimes about an older book. I have to Google when they talk about the characters to see who they're talking about.
I know. And today I was starting a new book this week and I've been playing with names and I had to look up the names I wanted to use to make sure I hadn't already used them.
Oh, I had a book that they put out a reprint the same month the new book came out and the hero had the same name. But it was a book like from 10, 15 years, like 20 years ago, maybe. And people wrote to me about that. Do you have another name?
I did that one time. That's why now I look it up. You make that mistake once and then you get enough letters. Well, I have a list of questions that readers wanted to hear about. So let's get started with that. The first question, what was your inspiration for The Inheritance? And I understand this is quite the story.
Yes, this is an interesting story. Like Tess in the book, I never knew my father. He deserted my mother when I was still a toddler. And so it wasn't like a tragic event in my life because you can't really miss what you never had. But it was a small town, so I was always aware of that, you know. And then I used to think about them from time to time, and I would hear family stories. I hear people, like little kids, you listen in, and I would hear people talking, and I knew that he and my mother drove from Brooklyn to LA when they were very young newlyweds to study at the Pasadena Playhouse. And when I was answering this question for somebody on a blog, I thought, oh, I wonder if that's what that dream big thing made a little girl from a ranching timber town of 12,000 people think she could someday be a writer. You know? So maybe there was something I inherited from them. But anyway, so I just didn't pay attention. Then one day I got an impulse to Google his name and I found his obituary, which was kind of sad. But then there was a sister I knew about that I knew her name. And I went, oh, now I know her name. So it was kind of like she became like a real person to me, but kind of a real person. Then move on a few years. Then I'm one day on Facebook and I think, I wonder if she's on Facebook. So I check on Facebook and there's somebody that looks like that's probably her. So I send her a little message and I said, do you happen to know when I name his name? And she says, why, yes, he's my dad. He was my dad. Did you know him? And I kind of went, uh-oh, you know? And I went, well, yeah, he was my father too. And then there was silence, like for 3 or 4 days, she disappeared. And I thought, boy, did I screw that one up. Because since I knew about her, I kind of assumed she knew about me, right? Wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, how much younger than you is she?
Like 15 years, maybe 10, 15 years, maybe. Okay, so not that long. Anyway, it was a period of time. There's also, by the way, now maybe she'll know if she watches this, there's a brother she doesn't know about in California somewhere too.
Wait, so did you guys ever hook up and have a relationship? Or?
Well, that's the thing. So I contacted her and she got back to me and she said, I ran down the street and asked my mom, did Dad have a family before ours? And the mom said, well, yes, he did. And she said, why didn't you ever tell us? And this was such a good line. It got in the book. The mom said, we didn't tell you because it never came up. And I mean, okay. Have you ever asked your parents, Mom, Dad, did you have another family? How could it come up? And so I put that line in the book. But that got me thinking. And I thought, well, what if there were two sisters and one knew about the other and that one didn't? So I played with that for a while and I went, well, let's make it three sisters. So we make it three sisters. And so I went with three sisters. Okay. And I played with that for a little while. And I went, okay, maybe one knows about one of the sisters. The other knows about all three sisters, and one doesn't know about any of the sisters. And that will make different relationships. And I went, that doesn't work. And so I put that aside for a few years too. Then one day, and you've probably had this happen to you, Jackson Swann started talking in my head. And this guy started talking in my head, and he would not shut up. He just kept talking and talking and talking. And he was the dad. Well, I was going to begin the book's called The Inheritance. I was going to begin the book with him already dead. And the lawyer coming around announcing to the girls that, they had inherited something.
I'm so glad you go that way, because that was a great opening from his point of view.
Thank you. But he insisted on that. He just insisted on that. And that was when I realized, and that was when I was able to write the book, because I realized it wasn't three sisters. It was three daughters, because each daughter's life had been informed by her relationship with the father, and each daughter had so many different things, different relationships, and different things happen, partly because of her relationship, or in Tessa's case, non-relationship with her dad. So as soon as Jackson started talking to me, then I could write the book. And since he gave me the book, I had to put him in. Also, he was such a flawed person, a terrible husband, not a good dad. I decided that I needed to go ahead and let people see that there really was a side to him, that he was flawed, but there was goodness in him. He just had been through so much, he couldn't quite have it anymore. He lost it.
We got all that from that book. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next question is, what do you think this story says about family history? And of course, this story says a lot about family history.
Yeah, a lot of history. One thing, I don't know if you remember, there used to be a show, Who Do You Think You Are? And Lisa Kudrow hosted it.
I loved that show.
Okay, and then Finding Your Roots is on now. Okay, I love those shows. I watched them both. Okay.
Me too. In fact, that first show with Lisa Kudrow, it inspired my Lost and Found Sisters.
I love that book. I love Lost and Found Sisters. That's one of my favorites. That's another reason I didn't do Two Sisters, because you had already done it so perfectly. I was not going to go in that place. But
I got that from that Lisa Kudrow show. I mean, that just really inspired me.
Well, it did show. Anybody who watches that learns that every family has secrets. And sometimes it's decades old, sometimes it's century old, but every family has secrets. And sometimes those secrets will eventually come out, and it might take a while, and then they will have an impact kind of who you are and how you see yourself. And so that, that's kind of how I feel about what it says about family history.
Yeah, I mean, all of us have it. Some of us don't like it.
Some of us don't know it until Mom says, well, it never came up.
Unbelievable. Okay, our next question. Did you know how the novel would end when you started writing it, or did you make changes along the way?
I made a lot of changes. As I said, I didn't expect Jackson to show up. But since he was the one started talking, and the deeper I got into the book, I realized I got to tell who this guy is, because he is awful. He's just seems awful. I did, by the way, research his job a lot, because especially the last few years when you've been watching these conflict photographers, they go to all these places and they see all these terrible things, and you got to wonder, how do they do it? And I looked it up, and there's actually lots of psychological books written by official medical people, studies, that most of them have survivor guilt and PTSD, because what they are, normally, if you see somebody in a terrible situation, you want to jump up and help. But their way of helping is not jumping in to help. their way of helping is documenting it for the world that isn't going to see it. But it really affects them as much as I thought. And so I did figure that out. Then I really thought another thing I did not expect. I knew Natalie was kind of easy. I knew Tess had a lot of me, I think, in it, but I knew Tess. And Charlotte, I didn't expect to get strong so fast. I actually foresaw that Charlotte was going to have a problem with her ex-husband, that part of the way they would bond is the other sisters would bond to help Charlotte fight her terrible ex-husband, soon to be ex-husband. But then Charlotte just started showing herself. And I lived in the South for a while, and I know I've been to that garden party there in that book. I have been at that garden party. I'm the girl not knowing why we're having that garden party. That garden maybe. So I understood that. So I knew how hard it was for Charlotte to start reclaiming her life. And so I was really surprised when she started doing it. So I threw out everything I had written about her and just kind of went with that. I also intended Madeleine's story to be told through journals. But she was another character that like her son, she jumped in and she wasn't having any of it.
That was my next question to you. Why was it important for you to include her in Robert's story?
Yeah, it was important because she and Robert, each one of them had a reason not to, well, Natalie didn't, but the other two especially didn't have a really reason to believe in everlasting love, that there was such a strong thing as love. And she and Robert were through so much, and they had lived and loved for so long together, and they had built this life, and they had passed down to their family this heritage of, bravery and being bold and going forward with your life while you still can have this true love, which they did. And so, yeah, Madeleine originally was going to not make it through the book. And then once Madeleine started showing herself, and what I loved about Madeleine, I think, is my favorite character, actually, Madeleine, because it went from Madeleine being a 13-year-old to getting her first, not real high heels, but kind of high heels, and worrying about a boy kissing her at the harvest dance, and maybe he'll dance with her, but gee, maybe he'll kiss her, to going to be a person who can fight Nazis. And each step of the way up the ladder of her growing in that resistance level, because, they were tough, they made her work her way up, to doing something, I'm not going to tell what it was, but there was one action she took toward the end with the Can girl, which I did not know I was going to write. That all of a sudden, Madeleine just did that, and I went, oh my God. And I went, go Madeleine. So there was no way I could not have her living at the end of the book. I was going to have a great, sad little ceremony at the cemetery and everything where everyone could care. And no, she's still out there living her life.
But had you always intended to write that story as part of this book, or was she just going to be a name?
She was going to be in journals. They were going to learn her from journals.
And then this was better. What you did was better.
Well, that was funny. I didn't actually send it in that way. I sent it in with Madeleine telling the stories at night, like she did in the book, but without the flashbacks. Because I already had, I don't know how many points of view, but a lot of points of view. Yeah. And I was afraid my editor would say, JoAnn, you can't put another point of view in. So she liked the book and she had some suggestions. And I thought, well, gee, she doesn't have too many changes. So I thought I'd dare it. And I said, well, what? She said, I'd really like to see more of Robert and Madeleine. And that gave me the clue. And I said, well, I originally saw it as flashbacks and actually showed her. Do you think that would work? And she said, yes, go with that. So that's how that got in.
Oh, I'm glad.
And they were fun to write. Those scenes were fun to write. I mean, some of them were hard, like when she was handing out the bread and stuff at the gates, when everybody was fleeing Paris. That
Did you have to research the time, Eric? Because you don't do historicals as a rule.
No, I don't. I can't remember how many books I read. And I purposely didn't read. I read one World War II novel during that time. And I went, oh, we just used the same research book. And so I could see where we took one, and we didn't use the same words or anything, but I could see a situation. And so when I came up with it, I lost a year because I was hospitalized and stuff, but that's a long story. But anyway, I lost a year. That book was supposed to come out a year earlier, and there weren't a lot of World War II books out. By the time I got to finishing it, there were all these World War II books. So I purposely didn't read any of them because I was afraid if I read any more and saw stuff that was in my book, I might feel I needed to take it out. So now I have a whole bunch of novels, but I read I had a stack of research books, 15, 20 research books.
Yeah, that's what my first question was. That must have taken you forever.
But see, I changed majors 5 times in college. And the last I went in to register for the final semester of my senior year and switched from English to urban geography. Okay. And so the last semester of my senior year, I already had my graduate thing all set up and everything, and taking my test and everything. And I changed. So when I start a new book, it's like changing majors every book. So that part I love the research part. That's part of the fun for me. I'm researching now a decade I'm not ready to talk about because I don't even know if my editor knows yet. Actually, my editor doesn't know yet because she knows a former one and I switched 2 days ago.
So, that was one of my questions. What are you working on now? You're not going to tell us, are you?
No, I did just finish The Honeymoon Harbor #4. I finished Burke's book, and it's going to be, I turned it in. I don't know why. I don't know if you've ever done this, but why I thought it was a good idea to have a book come out the same time I have a deadline.
No, I always have that happen, always. And every time I say I'm going to figure it out, I never figure it out in time.
And you're trying to finish the book and you keep going left brain, right brain, because you keep having to do blog posts and stuff, and which are lovely that people ask you to do, but you're answering questions and then trying to remember who these people are when you go back to the story.
Yeah.
So I just figured out a couple of days ago what I'm going to do with that. But Burke's story will be out June of 2022, and he's Burke, the 4th brother. There's 1 brother left.
Well,
Actually, he's the 4th family member. There's 4 brothers and 1 sister in the Honeymoon Harbor.
What comes after that series? Are you going to continue that series? Or are you going to start something new?
I don't know. I think I'll probably end with Quinn. He's the 5th family member. That'll give me 5 books. That's enough, I think, for that.
It's so funny.
The other book I am going somewhat historical because I really love playing in another decade. I've written, and you probably know, after a while when you write so many contemporaries, you start running out of situations that you haven't done before, and it's getting harder and harder to create new characters and stick them in new situations. Maybe it isn't for you.
Oh no,
but for me it is.
It's hard. The harder part for me, I have stories for days. The harder part is coming up with believable conflicts in contemporary, because you don't have a zombie apocalypse. You don't have, it's not in the 1880s gold rush. You don't have anything external.
Arranged marriages.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have
any on that now. So it's really hard to come up with believable conflicts.
Also, my books in the 80s were conflicts of the time. They were women starting to want equality and wanting to work and things like that. Well, those books now look so dated. And that's one of the problems with contemporary. You look back 10 or 20 years and those things aren't, it's one thing. Okay, yeah, the people are in a phone booth and they're using yellow pages. That's not a big deal, but the conflicts are so different. And so I guess essentially thinking about the 80s and 90s books we wrote can almost be considered the historicals now because things move so fast.
It's shocking how old I am. Okay, back to the story, back to the inheritance. What do you hope people take away from this story?
Okay, what I really hope people take away is that family is not just blood, and that's an important little secondary part of this story that is, I won't tell, and it's a surprise. But it isn't just blood. It doesn't come from the blood, it comes from the heart. And that you can't choose the families you're born into. But as you showed actually with your sister's book, you can choose the families you make. And those families come from the heart. And those people the family, you choose the people you love who will love you back. And then together you can find a way to continue down the path of your life. And that's kind of the overall arching message of that book, I think.
That's really
That was what I had in mind.
Is the family you make, whether it's blood or not blood. That's a huge theme for me in all my books. I love that.
Yeah, that was really big in Lost and Found Sisters. And then you also had it in Love for Beginners. Yes.
And actually my next book is called The Family You Make.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I know. And I was thinking, oh, I'd already answered that to somebody, and I went, well, I can't take that title.
Sorry, I don't even know. I think that was even my edit. I don't know that I came up with that, so I can't even claim it. One thing I've always wanted to know, do you come up with characters or plot first?
I always come up with characters. What I do is, I'm going to ask you the same question, so be prepared. So I always come up with characters. When I first started, I thought I was going to be a horror writer, actually. I was coming from newspapers and trying to find a place to write in fiction. And I looked, and there was Stephen King, Dean Koon, and John Saul in those days, in the 80s. And I didn't see any women at all, except for Hill House. That was the only woman I saw writing horror. And so I went, oh, and I thought, well, I'll write romance, which worked out quite well. But the one thing when a lot of people hear that I was going to write horror, they say, well, that's so different, but it's not, because they're both exactly the same. They're dependent on the characters. You can put any plot you want in a horror movie. You can put the vampires, you can put the clown, but if you're the 57 Plymouth or whatever the Christine was, but if you don't care about those people, you don't care if Christine the Plymouth runs over them, you don't care if the clown drags them into the sewer, or if you don't put the vampire, you don't care if the vampire in Salem's Lot gets them. You have to care about the characters. So I always come up with the characters that interest me. And they always have to, lots of times they have a job I kind of wish I could do. So I pick something like that. And then, as you said, I find a conflict or situation to throw them into. And then I just throw them into it. And since I don't plot, I'm not a synopsis writer. I normally know maybe 8 to 10 scenes ahead. I just have to trust that they will get me through it. And when they come up and take a big turn on me, some days I'll take a few days to think it over, because I go, that's not what you were supposed to do, in my mind. But if you write characters, I think if you start with them and get to know them, it took me I had a book, a secret nun baby book. That was back in the early 90s. I needed to have a woman that got pregnant by rape, but she couldn't keep the baby and she couldn't have an abortion because, well, she's a nun. And so it took me 5 years to figure out how to write a secret baby book. And Sister Molly stayed in my head. She's from No Regrets, if anybody wants to look it up. She stayed in my head for 5 years before I finally figured out how to write her story. So if they become real enough to you, I think you can trust the process and just let them go. Now, how do you do it?
I almost always come up with just a funny meet cute or a funny situation that makes me laugh. And then I think about it and think about it. And then, but before the story expands, the characters fall into place. It's all about the characters. Like you said, if you don't care about the characters, nothing matters. It just doesn't matter. And, think about the TV shows you watch. I'm watching Ted Lasso right now, a great show. And it's great because you care about every single character, good or bad. You care about them. And so that's what makes a good book. So to me, it's always about the characters.
Yeah, I've sucked into K-dramas. My husband and I have sucked into K-dramas, and we watched the rom-coms. We watched the political ones where the government's corrupt and the one brave person is going to maybe ruin his whole life and get killed because he's going to prove the corruption. We're watching where Japan took over Korea and there's big wars and everything. And it doesn't matter. It was serial killers. There's some serial killer books. We haven't watched the paranormal, but it doesn't. That's a funny thing. You get so hooked on them because they do a little differently than we do. They have like a dark moment at the end of every chapter.
Mhm.
And so it leaves you like, oh my God, what do you, and then you find yourself 4 hours later, you're still sitting there watching these people because it doesn't matter what genre, they've got it really nailed where you care about the people. And you, by the way, your meet cutes, I wouldn't even attempt it. Your meet cutes are so fabulous. The one in The First of the Sunrise Code, what is that? Let's see, I wrote it down. What is that?
The family.
Yes. That meet cute has got to be one of the best ever meet, horrifyingly, terrifyingly cute.
Well, and in that situation, the family you make, which is, it starts out with two strangers alone on a gondola in the turn of the century, and the gondola in front of them goes down. So they're certain they're next. So what happens when you think you're going to die and you're alone with a stranger, right? So that's what came to me first. And then I put the two characters in that I thought would be like the worst people for each other in that moment. And we were off and running.
That's hard for me to do, the worst people. That's my hardest one. And I think maybe because I grew up in a crazy dysfunctional family, as you can probably guess. And so I'm the great avoider of conflict.
Oh, me too. Me too. So that's why I have to do that, because otherwise the conflict's over right away, because I want everyone to get along. That's not really what people want to read.
No, but that's the best. That may be your best opening ever. That I was sitting there and I go, oh no.
My editor read the first chapter of that and she emailed me, so are we writing thrillers now? I'm like, no, keep reading. I promise it's going to get funny. I'm just going to try to kill these people first, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm not going to give anything away, but what you've set up with the phone call is one of those things that is so hard to do in contemporary romance, and I usually don't buy. But I actually told my husband, I said, Jill just set up a situation, I will buy that situation that these characters are going to have, because usually I don't buy that, and people have to read the book, or if they read the back of Love, isn't it the back of Love for Beginners?
Yes, it is. The excerpt is in the back of Love for Beginners. Yes. And also the whole first chapter should be up on my website on the book page.
But if they read that, they'll figure out what the situation is going to be. And as I said, it's hard for somebody to make me believe that, but in that case, I believe that situation.
I'm glad it worked for you. Let's hope readers like it. The next question I have for you is, this was actually personal. I enjoyed the present day segments of your book and the flashbacks that told the story of Magdalene and Robert. Why was it important for you to do so many generations? I mean, talk about not buying something. When I read a book that has that was 3 generations of people, I tend to get lost. I find I want the contemporary only, or I want the historical only. It's really hard to make me buy the historical and the contemporary in the same book, and you did it. But I'm just curious, as a writer, what you undertook, all those threads that you undertook, because not just 3 generations, but different time periods, and then you weave them all in, and every sister had a story. How did you write that book without plotting it? Because I know you're not a plotter. I don't understand how you didn't lose.
Well, one of the things you have to understand, I actually, when I started writing, sagas were big, those generational sagas. And I loved those.
That's what reminded me of old school Barbara Delinsky type.
And and Judith Krenz and all of those. Now, I did write a couple glitz books in those days that did that, but I loved the sagas. And if given my choice, and if we could, the printers, they could afford the paper, they could afford the shipping, they could afford the storage room, I would be writing sagas, because I've always written way back. A Harlequin editor told me in my Temptations, my first Temptation, she said, that was back in the 1983, 85, the very, very beginning of Temptation. She said, you're really different than other people. Your heroines have families. And I've always put grandmas in. I've always put, lots of children. And there was one time I was at dinner, and Star Hilmer was the head of Harlequin, and she was scary. Everybody was afraid of Harlequin. I was terrified of Star Hilmer. And I met her for the first time at a conference, and we were all sitting at a long table, Harlequin dinner table, right? And she said, well, I just read, and I can't even remember the name of the book, but she said, I just read it. And I said, okay. And I sent in the manuscript, and, you know, the whole table's holding their breath. It was my second book, I think. And she said, did anyone tell you you're not allowed to put children in a Harlequin book? And there's a literal, you could hear the gasp. You've been to those dinners. You can hear the gasp from everybody. And she said, did no one send you a tip sheet? And I said, no. And she said, well, she said, I read the whole thing, and everybody's now holding their breath, and I'm ready to die. And she said, and I loved it. So I've always put, and I volunteered for several years in Phoenix at a nursing home. And the women in their 80s, that was a different generation than the 50s. They all had jobs, they all did things, and they all told me stories about their lives. And so I just love writing the older people to begin with. And then I had to write the dad. And there were scenes from the dad that we cut. There were scenes with him with each of the wives, and we went, no, that book is now 1,000 pages. Let's cut something. And
You should take those extra scenes, put them up on your website for people to read.
Oh, I should, especially the first wife when they're in Vietnam. I have some wonderful Vietnam scenes.
Readers would probably love that.
That's a good idea.
In fact, readers probably aren't aware of the challenges you faced while writing this book. Are you willing to share any of that? Do you want to talk about it? You were not
well, I'll just quickly. I got this strange rare disease that 15,000 people in America get. And usually it's guys in their 30s that play football or do really hard sports or something. And I didn't do that. I didn't do any of that, or take steroids or something, you know. And so I was in New York, and I was running around with my agents, and I actually put 18,000 steps a day on my Fitbit, and I was feeling fine. And I got home, and I felt like I don't know if you're probably not old enough to remember that, but I felt like I was kind of limping around like Grandpa McCoy. And I thought, that's kind of funny. And so it kept going, and the doctor my internist did an x-ray, and he said, your arthritis has gotten worse. And I said, I don't have arthritis. Because I was kind of like you, I was very active. I climbed mountains, I hiked, I did stuff like that. And I went, I don't have arthritis. So I went into it, and so he sent me to physical therapy, and I knew that he wouldn't do any more unless I went ahead and did his damn physical therapy, but I knew I didn't have arthritis. And then so my PT guy said, this is getting worse, we have to stop. By then I'd already made an appointment with a Northwood guy. And I found out I had this disease where it cuts off the blood to your bones. So by the time I had an MRI, the whole right hip was gone and down into my femur. So everything that could go wrong went wrong. I ended up having 8 hip surgeries. I had 2 superbug infections, not the worst, but number 2 and number 3, they told me. And my husband and I were doing 14 weeks of IV therapy at home 3 times a day. And I got to tell you, it's like having a newborn, and you had a newborn in your house. So you know you don't get sleep. Yeah. Okay. We would have to you can't do 3 times a day without having the middle of the night. But we were having to do 2 different kinds of meds, and the syringes and the this and that. We would turn on every light in the house, and we would say it out loud to each other 2 or 3 times so we didn't screw it up. And so I had, 8 surgery within an 11-month period. I had 8 surgeries and 14 months of IV antibiotics. And I went 8.5 months without a hip. No hip, no putting down the right foot at all. So it was a challenge. There was a lot of time I did not write it. That's how I lost the year.
Yeah, that sucks. How are you doing now?
I'm okay, hanging in there.
Hanging in there. What more can we ask for?
Yeah, I did learn that you do forget how to walk.
Yeah.
If you go 8.5 months without being able to walk, you literally forget how to walk. I was walking like a toddler, you know, without a heel toe thing. Yeah.
Dangerous too, all in itself.
Yeah.
Well,
there was an experience. People say, you're gonna put books in hospitals. I go, oh, and I spent 66 days in the hospital. I went, nope, been there, done that.
I remember following you on Twitter and just nail biter a couple of those days. You had the super bugs.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't think I was going to make it. And I kept telling everybody they had to keep me alive because I had a contract. I'm serious. I kept writing to that contract.
I mean, you don't want to lose the contract.
No, my husband would have to pay it back.
One other thing I saw on your social media, besides following your health, was following your crafts. Like you make these beautiful cards.
Thank you.
What can you
I started making those for the Iraq War. As there was cards for soldiers and then Operation Ride Home. And we would make blank inside cards for deployed troops to send back home to their families and their, friends and everything like that. And then the one group, Operation Ride Home, we sent out 3 million cards we made and we had people in Denmark, Australia, we had people all around the world sending these cards, making these cards and sending them out. But it was a 503 nonprofit. So as soon as the troops marched out of Iraq, the 503 was over because that's what it was based on. So then I had to find a new place. So then I found this teenager who had survived cancer, and she started cards for hospitalized kids. And so I started making cards for very ill or sometimes terminally ill children at all different hospitals in St. Jude's and things like that. And I started making cards for them, which worked for me because quite honestly, I make fancier flower cards and stuff for friends, I try. But the nice thing about making cards for kids, I get to use fun things. When I was doing Operation Ride Home, I mostly wrote cards because I thought about, I don't know if you know Jessica Scott, the writer Jessica Scott.
I've read her books and I've met her.
I met her online when I was researching Iraq. And she was deployed with a baby and a toddler at home. And every time I made a card, I thought of her kids. And so I made kid cards. And they're fun also because with kids cards, kids are just happy to get cards. And they don't know that I'm not the most amazing card maker ever. I can put bunnies in airplanes and they like that, and I don't have to have somebody say, well, she didn't exactly shade her Copic markers correctly.
Oh, what a beautiful thing. You spent so much time and effort. I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. I loved it. It's a nice thing for me to do.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing for me to do.
Well, I love watching you on social media. People should follow you if they want to see the cards that you make. You post some pretty pictures too of your area, of your landscape.
Thank you. Yes, we're here in the Pacific Northwest. It's not your Lake Tahoe. I used to go every year and I would swim in Lake Tahoe every year. We would come down from Oregon and we would go to Reno and Tahoe. So that's a beautiful place. But yeah. I love it up here in our Pacific Northwest. And that's why my shelter bays are actually put where Jay proposed to me when I was 18.
Oh.
And right at the seawall at Shelter Bay. So the things in Shelter Bay are things that are real. And the Honeymoon Harbor isn't that far away from me. So I actually used your Lucky Harbor in a novella that's coming out. It already came out by itself, but it was a Walmart only novella. So it's coming out in the back of the book in June. But I sent my people to Lucky Harbor.
Oh, you let me know when the book comes out. We should do a giveaway across of my Lucky Harbor.
I needed a place for them to go, and I went, well, I already have a place, so I sent them to Lucky Harbor, and they ride the carousel, the Ferris wheel. They ride the Ferris wheel.
So we have a few questions left too, I think. As I mentioned earlier, The Inheritance is your women's fiction debut. Are you going to do more of those? You mentioned the possible.
Yes, I am. And actually, that's a funny thing. It's technically my fiction debut, but if you look at the old Mirror books and everything I wrote back in the 90s, they were kind of the same, but they weren't titled women's fiction in those days. They were called fat romances, And there is romance in this book too. And everybody does have a happy ending.
That's true. People need to.
Well, everybody except Jack, but people know at the beginning, right? And so, yeah. So this one, I like the different timelines and different time things. So, as I said, I'm working on a decade now. I switched decades. I had a decade, then I switched another decade. Now I'm back to my original one.
You just enjoy the research more than I would. Okay, so you've had a very fascinating life, and readers should check out 10 Things About JoAnn at her website. With a wide array of experiences, have you ever used or considered using your own experiences in your writing? And specifically, my question to you is yours and Jay's story. Have you ever considered
Oh, yeah, I write not our exact story, but people say they don't believe second chance romances. They say, nah, if you get divorced, you know. No, we did get married twice. We got divorced, we married at 18 and 21, right after he graduated college. And when you're in a small town back in those days of 12,000 people, the best, I'm not kidding, the best job was the cosmetic counter at the Payless drugstore for women in those days. So if you were in a small town, you got married. Then we went down to Arizona for his graduate school. But then the 70s came along, and the 70s women started thinking, you know, they should actually have their own lives too, you know? And it took a while for the men to catch up.
Yeah.
And we actually lived for 2 years totally separate. He was climbing the corporate ladder, and his job got to where he promised me he would never do this. We watched other people ahead of him take the job where you left home for 2 years, essentially. And you went around to all these different states training other people. And he had always promised me he wouldn't do that. And he did that. And that's not why we got a divorce. But I was wanting my own career. I was flying around at the time on company planes, and I had my own little office and stuff. And it took, and he would go to work and everybody would say, what's the matter with you that your wife, you can't support your wife? And I don't think it was a mistake. I was surprised. I was the first woman on our street to go to work, and I was the first woman on our street to get divorced. It just took men a while to come back. And then he'd come back to town whenever he was back in town. He'd visit our son and everything. Then one time he told me, he said, I've got to have all my wisdom teeth pulled out, because the town he was in, New Mexico, didn't have a dentist that could do that. He said, so I'm coming back to Phoenix. Can you take me to the hotel afterwards? And I went, okay, I can do that. And I don't know if you've ever seen anyone who's had 4 wisdom teeth pulled out. I found out in the waiting room why I saw people go in and never come out. They take you out the back door because they're afraid everyone in the waiting room will want to run away if they see what you look like. His face was awful, and I could not drop him off at the hotel. I just could not do that. So I told him, I said, okay. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll take you home, 1 negative word and you're out. And he never left.
That's cute.
But what we found is we had always been in love. We just had to catch up and like each other again. And that was what had been missing, because the lives were splitting so differently. And as I said, it was the 70s. People my age, I just go, it was the 70s, and everybody gets it. You know, because the 70s was a time of massive change in women and men's relationships. And so, yeah.
Glad he decided that he knew what he was missing and he came back.
I know, and we've done 53 years.
Wow.
And Nora Roberts years ago told me that dear Abby said that if you remarry your ex-husband, you get to count all the years.
That's right.
So I figure, who knows more about romance than dear Abby and Nora?
I mean,
so I count all the years.
You should. All right, here's our last question for the night. Unless you guys who are listening, if you could type questions into the Q&A, I'll ask her any question you post. But the last question I have is there anything else we should know?
Okay, the one thing I do want to say is how grateful I am that I've been writing 38 years. And I could not have done that if it weren't for the librarians, the booksellers, more recently, the bloggers, and all those readers who've kept buying my books. And I, like you, sometimes I have to go on Amazon and look them up because they're so old, I can't remember them, And so I'm so grateful, because when I was 7 years old, I wrote a story about 2 mallard ducks, and they had baby ducklings, okay? And the mother duck got shot by hunters, and she did not die slowly. It took chapter after chapter after chapter of her to fly into that wetlands in the sky. And the Drake was a grieving widower, and he had to raise the ducklings alone. So that I got a gold star, and all the teachers in school, in my little Peterson Elementary School, were talking about, wow, she can write stories. So at 7 years old, because of that book, I decided that I was going to be a writer when I grew up. I just knew I was going to be a writer. And which is kind of audacious, as I said, it's a town of 12,000 with ranchers and timber guys. But if it wasn't for all those people that bought my books to publish, you know, the editors, all those people, the house publishing houses, if it weren't for the librarians and the booksellers getting those books into people's hands, and if it weren't for all those people, I mean, how many people get to live their 7-year-old dream?
I mean, it's amazing. I think what we do is the best job on the planet, personally. And I too am very grateful for booksellers, librarians, readers, bloggers, bookstagrammers.
And all the editors and all the people in the art department. Oh, and boy, the art departments. You have had some fantastic covers. I've had some fantastic covers. We've had great art departments.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's the main thing. So I just want to thank everybody. And I want to thank you for doing this with me tonight.
Oh, yeah, it was so good to see you again.
It was. And not in an elevator.
I know.
We're going to have to do it in person.
Let's see. JoAnn, thanks for all the years of reading. Jill, aren't you afraid of bears? Anita, I live in Tahoe and I am right this moment sandwiched between two very large fires. So the bears and the coyotes and the biggest bucks I've ever seen and the raccoons, they're everywhere. We live on some property. We have a lot of land, and every day I see something. And I try not to be, the bears are meek. I should say they're brown bears, they're brown California bears. And they run for me before I can see them half the time. So I'm not necessarily afraid of the bears. I'm much more afraid of the coyotes, who are brazen this year.
Yeah, we have them all through our neighborhood. They'll walk down the middle of the street in the daytime.
Yeah, here too.
Yeah. And there's more this year.
Yeah.
I've noticed. Yeah. And you hear the coyote parties at night, and you know some kitty bit it. Bit the dust.
I don't understand why people let their cats outside when they live here, but so no, Anita, I'm not afraid of bears necessarily. I don't want to get between a bear mama and her babies, but other than that, I'm good. Does anybody else have any questions for us? I mean, I think our hour is up. I can't quite read the clock.
Yeah, we're like 5 minutes. That's a pretty much good hour. I knew we could do it.
We could do it. Thank you, everybody who's here. If you came and you're listening, we appreciate your visit.
And who, Allie, for being here in case we had a problem.
Yep. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Alrighty, so I am back. It looks like we are about at the end of our evening, of our time together. So this has been such a delightful conversation. Thank you both so much for being here. Audience members, thank you so for turning out. We are so happy to have you here. For anyone who would like to get hands on books, go ahead and scroll up in that chat box. There are links to books in there. So take this moment to scroll on up if you haven't already, if you'd like to get your hands on a copy. If you're local, do come on in, tell a bookseller how you felt about this event. If you're not local, find us online. Let us know that way. We always love to hear from you. And I think that is all of my business. So Jill and JoAnn, one more huge thank you. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Of
and
course.
I have managed to avoid base traffic getting to do it with you. I went down by the base. I am down in South Puget Sound.
Yes, that drive can be startlingly long. I know.
Well, with the base traffic, yes.
Really?
And everybody who works at the base thinks that they're jet fighter pilots with their driving.
They do. And maybe they could. Anyway. All right, everyone.
Thanks.
I think this is a due. So thank you, and good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Allie. Bye-bye.
Bye.